Hello, everyone. My name is Muriel. I'm going to talk about design process, or how I call it, the golden path to ways of working. And I'm going to start with a lot of intros. I'm not going to talk about myself too much. I'm just going to say that I am the head of UX research and design at Fabric, previously Disney, Walmart, Google, a bunch of other places where I led and scaled up design and UX team, as well as research teams. A little bit of the agenda here, what we'll cover. So the framework, I'm actually going to start from the end. So it's really about design ways of working and how to make sure systems are in place to unlock creativity. I'm a big, crazy creative person. I like coming up with original ideas myself. I actually found out that the more process and the clarity there gives you the more ability to be original and creative. So I want to make sure this thing works for anyone, which is how I'm going to start. So step by step kind of thing. Next, we're going to move into the what, or I wrote free sample. You get a bonus saying how I did it, how I failed, and then made things better, failed, made things better until they worked and became well-oiled machines, and then how to get there. And then the nitty-gritty, do it yourself, ROIs, and how to prove the KPIs of that, which is pretty hard, but you can do this through Jira. So this is really just kind of like what we'll cover. And I'm going to start right away because you guys want to get some info here. So I kind of split it to like about 4 or 5 steps. And the biggest recommendation I have really is in step number 1 in the whole approach. Treat this process as a research task. What I mean by that is treat it as much as you would treat some kind of a thing in which you're not sure what you're going to get. You have some guiding principles, but you mostly just listen and absorb. So it doesn't matter if you just join the team as a head, as a process person, as a designer, even to influence things, or you inherited the team, or you're starting a new team, or you've been around for a while and something doesn't work. Treat what you have in front of you as the stepping stone, and absorb. So I put these glasses here, but really it's kind of like ears, eyes, and pencils, to make sure you're going to fit that into this current organization. There's no one fit all. We all know that. The first step is probably the most crucial, to my opinion, to understand what you need to make it work. So again, every organization is different. Make sure you take notes. I'm going to explain in a bit what I did to treat it as a UX research portion. But yeah, just take it in. Next step is plan it out. So if you get a framework, I got lucky. I did ways of working in a bunch of different very large companies. That I went to a small company. I had some type of a framework that I could start from. So this is kind of like your table, if it's your process, if it's your step-by-step, whatever that is that you already did, take it to the starting point. If you don't have one, guess what? There's 5 million resources online. Just look into how others do that. Not everything is the same, obviously, but look what feels right to you. I believe a lot in the subconscious gut of a head of design or of a manager or of a designer. Our subconscious brains work really well. Read through, look around, and see what feels right. Take the one that feels right as a starting point. Next step is the sellout. So, step number 2 is really kind of like putting it together, distilling information from this research portion and making it go into your tailor-made creation, which is this process that you have in mind. This step is as important as the previous one. Why? Because you have to see where your organization is standing at. Where are they at? You need to meet them where they're at. And what I mean by that, for the most part, is what is the level of maturity you have in the organization towards understanding design as a whole, understanding the UX process and product design as a whole, incorporating yourself or your team or your upcoming team if you're alone, which happens a lot in startups. And there is going to be a bit of a gap between where they are and where you want to go. So you came up with your amazing plan in the previous step. It's like spark in your brain. Oh my God, I've got it together. I'm going to make it happen. Guess what? You have to sell it. Again, the key for this is the same research approach that I talked about in step number 1. If you know where they're standing and you get a sense of the company, how they function, how people talk, speak, how they react to each other, get a checks and balances of that step and insert it into your plan of selling it out. Again, it can be as a head, as a manager, whatever that is, as an operations manager. But you have to understand where they're at, as we all know, as UX people, right? The why, to know how to sell the what to them. So the sellout is really a meticulous plan, and I will highly recommend doing it as a storytelling thing. Stories are great, and they involve emotion. They also involve metrics, and you can do a lot with that. But again, every organization is different. They will need a different sellout. So this is as important as a step as the previous one, I would argue. Okay, moving on, of course, you were able to sell your process, this crazy thing you came up with after research, after framework, and now you kind of have to make it work. So you have to run. This is the most iterative step of all. And you really have to measure your outputs. You have to collect your metrics. You need to start telling your story. You have to think about the end. The end is it working? Is it not working? Can I change it? What do I need to change? How do I prove my ROIs, my KPIs, and all these things you have to do, which is gibberish many times to any of you that started as a designer. We all don't like these technical things. We want to create art. We want to create super solid motherboards. We don't want to deal with ticketing and pointing and code-related applications. So we want to measure the outputs the way most companies treat it, which is agile. So I highly recommend taking a framework that feels as similar as you possibly can to the engineering metrics. And the reason I'm saying that is because it's very, very hard, as we know, to quantify good design. But there is a way to quantify the amount of good design and to put a lot of caveats as an inspiring factor, right? Which I think is the lead. I'm not going to say the boss or the manager, but really the inspiring factor of making things best quality it can be, right? So to unlock the ability to do best quality, which is very hard to measure, you can use the metrics from the quantitative side of things to measure your outputs. So this portion, again, is just like the nitty-gritty of how to make it happen. Start it. Don't be afraid to fall and fail and change things, and then readjust, rerun until we go to a good place. It's really the testing period of that. And don't forget this last step, because it's important. Something worked, show it. This is a step that I forget sometimes to do, and I think it's super crucial. It will unlock your ability to do more things with whatever organization you're at. So if something didn't work, don't go here, go back, rerun, adjust, rerun, do more interviews, do more measurements, quantify in different ways, speak to your crew, do a lot of retros, understand what doesn't work for them, adjust, rerun. When it works, showcase that. And that's where you kind of go back to the second step of the process and adjust a lot of things there to become your golden path. Pretty straightforward. A lot can go wrong, but there's a lot of steps to make sure you make it right. So this framework should really work in any organization, because I think the how is as important sometimes as the what. And it's important to know where you're standing. This kind of measures less for necessarily, right? Like design studios, like people that the main metrics are visual studios. If it's a print design, in which we're kind of working in a known pool, a very knowledgeable pool of folks. But even there, you have a certain process, and some processes work better than others. The only way to make it happen is to start quantifying, qualifying, and then readjusting all the time. So that's regarding that. The process, the how, just starting from the end. Now I'm going to go back and click down into something I did. So again, I was the head of UX architecture for Disney ABC. I was the head of UX for Walmart Labs at some point. And then I moved to Fabric, which is the headless e-commerce platform, and a really scrappy startup. And as you can imagine, those companies are very different. I'm going to show the distilled version of what I do right now, what I recently changed and did in Fabric, and how we scaled up from a team of 1 to a team of 7 that is working in a very, very high velocity. So I'm going to talk about kind of my shift from what I knew before, which is my latest one, which was Disney. And then what is the sellout process and story that I did at Fabric, which is a very different story, because the company was in a very different place of understanding the importance, the how-tos, and the nitty-gritty of design and UX processes. So we're going to start with this free sample for you. Step 1, in this specific company, there was a lot of cooks. So I said, all right, sounds good. Let's bring them on into the room. Let's hold all the interviews. I obviously came up with a script, as researchers should have, some kind of a starting point. And what I like to do a lot, and I did adjust it a little bit for this company, but I typically run it anywhere, is getting very different types of people, not just types of roles that have an attachment of sort to the design process. And then I love to start with just saying like, hey, just no judgment, no yes or no. Just tell me today, how do you work with the design, UX, or research teams? Break down raw process to me, like step by step. I love doing journey maps to understand exactly what they're doing from beginning, even before they think they work with design, but there is maybe an attachment, all the way to the end, to the completion and delivery. So I do a breakdown. It's really robust. Of course, I want to look into inputs and outputs. It's kind of the last step, but then I'm asking very directly like what works and what doesn't work for you today. And it's really open, right? It's an open conversation. It can be anything from metrics. Some people are very analytical and technical. Some people are very emotional, and their soft skills are what's important for them. So I'm just, document that. I'm trying to keep as similar of a format to all the interviewees that I can, just to measure more correctly as we do. But that was pretty much it. The interview step was big. I was able to unlock a lot there and understand a lot about the organization, but that was still new. And then I dived into kind of the next step of the pre-plan. So I took what I knew before, which was very big companies. And by the way, I am coming from a startup background, so it's not like I just started in corporations. Corporations were a big stepping stone. I still love startups, but I was able to look into really large teams there and adjust some really intense initiatives. So that was my background, right? That was my pre-plan. I had a bunch of things there. I distilled it a little bit, took things from different things. You see some Walmart here, this is processes. You see some process that I came up with earlier at Disney, and how I adjusted it. And I was like, okay, I have a starting point. Let's see how far it is from what I had in mind. So I put some things together about like, okay, what things can I pull from? You see the font here of Walmart Tech, used to be Walmart Labs. And some kind of a method that I came up with, again, with a very similar process, but adjusting a lot from the previous, even larger Disney team that I had, which was cross-functional. So I took a lot of things in, and I kind of came up with a framework that matched. Again, this is like not doing anything yet, just looking into the research, the first step, and putting together a chart of ways of working for my team based on my previous knowledge. I was a bit privileged in that I already did that, but I had a starting point, and this is not a bad one. You see a very robust process. I'm not going to get too much into the process itself. I'm just going to note one thing about that is pretty cool. Like a quick bonus. Glue. How do you provide glue to your team? And how do they glue together? How they gel? And then how is I'm going to say a word that's very Gen Z, vibe is kept very kind and caring and pushing each other. This is really done through, surprisingly, reviews. And I'm not in these sessions. They're kind of happening peer-to-peer. But to enforce the step of peer reviews for every single item, and people start getting feedback, they also need to give feedback. You kind of see, even you have some kind of a rock star in your team, which is never recommended, but someone very talented, if he or she or they are giving problematic critique, right? Like, so personal, non-professional, or not building up, right? Not challenging the other member. Also not speaking a lot is also not great, right? You want someone that will be really involved in someone else's project. They will not get this feedback. And they'll see others that give good feedback and constructive criticism, make their work better, their peers work better, that eventually hopefully some people become friends. So that kind of creates this like camaraderie of like, oh, I'm going to push you, you're going to be better, this is going to be a project, it's going to be my project. And things became our projects, but very organically. So that was pretty cool. One of the things that I like the most to do is a lot of internal reviews. It just provides people with a challenge constantly for each other, and that's pretty cool. Just want to highlight, there's a lot more to highlight there, but again, this is something that I came up with. You can have your own version of it. You can start from somewhere, you can even start from that. And then I was like, all right, I have a plan, right? I did the research, I adjusted my chart or my process. Now, how about the org? And I kind of got a sense of this org from a bunch of folks in the beginning, in the interviews. But the more time passed, like the few days that I was really adjusting this, I realized a lot of things about this company. And I had to go really back. So the sellout for this specific company was, while they had some good designs out there in the wild, and while a lot of them think they really appreciate and love designs, I basically realized that to them, design literally equals that. If it's for marketing, if it's for sales, if it's UX, that's what design means to them. I would actually argue that a lot of companies have the same perception of what design means, the aesthetics or the high fidelity layer, the UI. But as we all know, hopefully, good design really means that. And the high fidelity wireframes that are the end, right, the tip of the iceberg is really based on all of those steps in very different shapes and forms, right? Not everything is always possible in Scrum and in Agile, but you can do a lot. And I went back to this slide. This is a slide that I presented as the sellout to this, hey, please let me run my own Scrum team with my design team and adjust the columns and adjust the processes to fit what I think will fit this team. You won't just get it free. Maybe you will. Awesome if you do. If you don't, you have to really look how you're going to sell it. For this company, I realized that there is a bit of a misleading understanding of what design really means. And it was kind of, truly a little shallow in the way that they only see visuals. And, really good design means all of this to me and to many others. So I had to do some teaching, I had to do some education, some evangelizing for this thing. And then the second thing I had to do is basically tell them like, hey guys, some things are actually not working. And this just came from the interviews. So this is actually qualitative. Here's the data of what works and what doesn't work. There's a lot of doesn't work. And by the way, this is not unique for this company I worked at. It happens in a lot of places. A lack of process and a lack of an ability to give the time and effort level for design, UX, and research team is a known pain all over the place. All of the, 8, 10, 9 companies I eventually worked in, probably more. As a contractor, as a freelancer, there's always some type of a lack of understanding or appreciation towards design, UX, or research processes. Always. The question is, at what level are they at? Meet them where they're at and make sure that you're reflecting what's happening and also where to go. So again, I had to do some, you guys, this is not what this means. And also we have some problems. A big one that was something for me that is really important. And the reason I like a rigid process is because it actually allows me to see what's going on so I can make sure the work-life balance is kept. So one of the harshest things in this current company and in a lot of startups, especially in building steps, first few years, is that you see people like running around, on a wheel, like hamsters, without an ability to breathe, and things are actually not moving faster. So they're running their fuel on not necessarily the right things, and you see people doing weekends and nights, and that just makes me hurt because I don't think that's the way to go. Can you sometimes do a weekend? Sure, go ahead, enjoy. But if a designer of mine is doing a weekend, something went wrong in the planning. Let's look back into that and see how it doesn't happen ever again. Because guess what? We all need to have work-life balance, and mental health is super important, truly. So get a process into place so that you can actually measure and help your teammates to grow. That's another thing I had to present a little bit. And this is kind of going to the crux of this presentation. One slide. Why do we need to work differently for Agile as designers? And it's because we work differently, period, right? And that's why you have to kind of really use whatever software you have and whatever process there is in place for engineering and say, hey guys, just a little bit of a flag, white flag. We're different. We don't write code. So instead of a single solution, there are multiple iterations. Instead of one directional step by step, the review process is back and forth. And again, set in iterations. So to work in a real agile fashion, but truly to run fast, we really need to implement a creative system within the larger technical one. And I coined it as agile for design teams. I'm sure there's 5 million other names for this. But again, this is what I found to be useful. And this explanation, this slide, I have to say, was carried with me in my back pocket in all the companies I just mentioned that I utilized this system in. There's a lack of understanding many times. You have to take a little step back and be like, do they even know how different we are? The answer is many times they do not. And people will not necessarily tell you, I don't know how design works or what's your process. They're like, oh, do this thing. And then you show it, I don't know. Make sure you are caring and sometimes just showing what we do. And that's important, I think, for any company, any process. Okay, step number 4. You have to just go. Thank you to my cross-functional designers here. Took a screenshot to say hi. We do meditation on Mondays. Again, that's what I found to work for my team. But you just run. Now, on the right, you see a pretty boring screen called Jira, Scrum, Agile, whatever. that's just a tool. If you actually look inside, you see a lot of different columns there that are quite different than other teams' columns. And the biggest thing you'll notice is that all of those tickets are either UX, which we call low fidelity prototypes, VD, which is the high fidelity prototypes, so design system related items, and UXR, which is the research portion, which I'm trying to introduce to every single ticket. I'll talk about it in a different time. But you see that we actually only have those tickets. We don't have engineering. This is not a sprint with engineers and product leads. Now I just put an X factor into this room. Some of you will be like, oh my God, like, how can you even do that? That's horrible. We can't move fast. Actually, it moves faster. So again, because our process is a little different, to tackle the end engineering there is a little tricky. And I'm not going to talk too much about story writing. I do think you need to hone on it as well. I do think designers and design producers and UXers and researchers and product designers should be able to write their own stories. The reason I think that should be the case is because then you get the why. You can ask the harsh questions. So again, a lot to unfold in here, but you just have to just let it run, see what happens. And then, we have to pause if something is weird and there's a lot of weird stuff, and just measure and adjust. Okay, so we had this peer process. It works okay, but like, do we need more? We do. Why? That's why. Do we need to do some kind of a mixed ticket? We should. The research separated from design has been taking extra time. We have to consolidate it. How do we do so? Just start looking into what you can do, how you can utilize the system to make it work for you and your needs, your velocity that's required, the motion of the company, and what you want to include as a head. It's subjective. You may be a very data-driven design head. You may be a very visual-driven design head. You want to go kind of wild and then test and then try, but I'm not going to tell you what to do, but look into your own process and be diligent, be critical. Some things failed in this process that I did. At some point there was some things were released and they didn't have an upper eye, or rather, like a lead review, which came from a manager. I had two peers that were brilliant, but not the most solid on low fidelity and prototyping. And there was something that was released that was not working very well. It was gorgeous. It was pretty smart, but the motion of the journey was a bit, cluttered. So I was like, all right, maybe we need to add like a bit of a lead review. Let's see how it works. I thought my team is going to hate me. They did not. They were actually excited to get some extra eyes on things sometimes. And then they became 7 times better than what I could do. So again, it depends on the process, but make sure you're being really diligent, self-critical, wide-eyed, but also very tough on the process. And that's where it's really important. It's not enough to just put it in place. You have to make sure it's working. I highly recommend for a Scrum Master, either do it yourself. It's scrappy, it takes a lot of time, but just do it yourself, or get someone who understands a bit of the design process to do it with you, and start going through the motions, right? So I'd be like, okay, we moved into implementation without an external stakeholder review. We need to do an external stakeholder review. Then we realize we need to do an additional external stakeholder. So it's not enough to have one. We need to do one after low fidelity, and then we need to do one after high fidelity to ensure everyone got what they needed to get. Then we realize we're actually missing another stakeholder review because we have some cooks in the kitchen, some smart people that want to weigh in. All right, we need to do an internal product-led stakeholder review and a customer stakeholder review in the same process without releasing it, because then the money we're wasting on engineering it is too much. So we include a bunch of steps. This is a result of a lot of work that you see here, this kind of colorful thing. While I was speaking, you probably were looking through what that means. That proved to work really, really well for this company, for our motion. Again, this is coming after running it and adjusting it. And then you rerun and you start completing a lot of things. And you're like, okay, now I completed a lot of things. Look at this beautiful graph. We can show how many points we completed. Again, a systematic engineering-led process, which is called Jira, but you can quantify your work. You can quantify design work. Now, for the quality portion of things, this is up to you, right? So personally, I involve an enormous amount of best practices. I involve Baymarks for e-commerce metrics. I involve Lisa and Norman all the time. We do audits many times. So I have like my own personal system for me that works really well to measure quality. And I'm very hardcore on quality. I think quality is top notch. However, I have to also show the others, my heads, all the executives, that there is a reason I took this board and made it only for design teams. How do I show it? With metrics. That's where I think utilizing this tool can be really useful. And then show and tell, something worked really well. You have to make a case for it. Again, this is kind of like the other side of it and like the boring side of it. But you have data, now you have it, go ahead and show it. It may not prove the ROI of design, which is always hard to prove, but it will show completion. You can show quality and what metrics you checked, and include everything in the process you want to make sure you're working well. Another big thing for many people is accessibility. Include it in the process. Make sure you get the right eyes if you have someone that's incredible. If not, just go into WCAG, do 2.0 or 3.0, hire a contractor. Make sure you have that as a checks and balances for yourself, for your quality check. So again, this is changing between teams, but to quantify it, to put it in a systematic matter really helps. And the more design research, kind of like, this group that you can make happen is sitting in Scrum, not together with other teams, you can actually measure it better. So even if eventually you have enough people, for a 500 people organization, let's say you actually do have a head on a domain. Awesome. Go ahead, let them go. Make sure everyone is aware of the process, insert it there. But if you don't, and many times, teams are scrappy of design. In Walmart, I had a very scrappy team. It was, I think, a ratio of like 1 to 50 designer to engineer. So they had to move between different domains. I couldn't put a hand on the domain. I had to work in this matter so that I can evaluate. I can give people the same amounts of work, and no one is going crazy on one project and the other person is just chilling. So that's a way for you to do the checks and balances for your team and make sure they're happy with the work, and also they know the process. They can't fail too much. And if they're failing, it's with an original idea, which is great, and not failing because they missed a step. So that's it for today. Again, I highly recommend to start it as a research task, see what you got, and then start adjusting it. Feel free to steal my framework for the process, but then make it your own. It only, again, is going to be good if it works for you and your team, and it's ever changing. As long as you do it, should be good to go. That's it. Have a nice day.